Let me go ahead and introduce Rear Admiral Young. We're very fortunate to have her. She's a native of New Mexico. Began her Navy career as a 1984 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Over her 27-year naval career, she served in many positions with responsibilities ranging from space surveillance, biological warfare sensors, naval tactical unmanned air vehicles, systems engineering, and program management. Admiral Young completed her government career as the Director of Systems Engineering Directorate at the National Reconnaissance Office. And during that assignment, she was the Navy's Program Executive Officer for Space. Since retiring, Admiral Young has worked as a consultant. She currently serves as a member of the Space Dynamics Laboratories Guidance Council and the Draper Laboratories Board of Directors. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Admiral Young.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Thanks to c-trac and Brian for setting this up. It's going to be great fun to get to talk to you guys about something as important as positioning, navigation, and timing. I'm not sure our reliance on PNT and hence GPS can really be overemphasized, but I'll try and do that. But first, a caveat. I'm not a PNT guy, and you guys are, so you have to be nice to me. Now, I do know some PNT guys, and we'll come up with that. Now, as Brian said, I think we're here because the DoD and the Congress, in one of their lucid moments, realized that we are very reliant on GPS and understand that we need some options for GPS. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. I did notice with some amusement that all the services have been directed to go and look and see what they can do about their reliance on GPS or PNT. And those words are actually really synonymous at this point in time. And so what I saw was how cool. You know, the Air Force has this neat meeting that you come to with cookies and some drinks. And the Navy and the Army put out a BAA that you can read on your own time and come back and tell you how it's going. Well, let's talk about PNT and how we use it. For me, a first great example is precision-guided munitions. Now, some people can trace the history of guided munitions all the way back to the 1940 Battle of Britain, where that was the first successful demonstration of a battlefield network exploiting long-range sensors, and that was radar. Now, I think for most of us, guided munitions, precision-guided munitions, the P doesn't really come along until the late 80s, the early 90s. And in the 1991 Gulf War, 8% of the munitions dropped were precision-guided munitions. By 1999, in Kosovo, it was 29%. 2001, Afghanistan, 60%. 2003, Iraq, 68%. Now, I will point out that precision-guided munitions, those that we think of where you give them an address and you say, fly here and blow that up, they're only as good as the address you give them. In 1999 in Kosovo, a B-2 dropped 2 JDAMs on the Chinese embassy. And that was a bad incident for us. The target was misidentified. That was not a delivery error. That was a targeting error. So I think it's kind of instructive for us to note that as we developed this precision delivery of weapons, it drove a great improvement in command and control networks and targeting networks. And that's an entire system unto itself. Other countries are very interested in precision-guided munitions because our ability to employ precise munitions, which require PNT, has given us a tremendous warfighting advantage for a number of decades. But what you see now is the Russians are building them, the Chinese are building them. An example is the emerging Chinese A2AD network in the South China Sea. Us Navy guys kind of worry about that. We've also seen the proliferation move beyond state actors. So in the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah actually used some guided munitions, and they successfully attacked an Israeli corvette using the anti-ship cruise missile. Now that was a Chinese weapon, and they were a proxy for Iran. But the point is, this was what we would call a low-end employment of precision-guided munitions, but it forced the Israelis to change their tactics, and it made a difference. Now, I can't go on and talk about precision-guided munitions and PNT and leave out the ground guys, because my husband is a retired Marine infantry officer, and he's a bit of a history buff, if my examples didn't give you a hint there. But he pointed out to me that a lot of the stories, if you look back in time, Vietnam, Korea, WW1, 2, the stories of heroism often start with, we were lost. And that was part of the reason why they had to be heroic. And if you think about it, the ground forces always have to answer 3 questions, and you guys can correct me when I get that wrong. Where am I? Where are my forces and the other friendly forces? Where's the bad guy, and what's the best path to get to her and take her out? And if you think back in the day before GPS, how did we do that? I read a paper, and I forgot the guy's name. If you want the reference, I'll get it for you. I'm pretty sure it was a gentleman from Northrop, but he presented a fairly compelling scenario that said, picture a lieutenant in the middle of the night in a swamp in the pouring rain with a compass and a map. And it was an old map. So the advancement of GPS allowed individual soldiers, small units, to know exactly where they are. And that's a huge advancement. But that also drove Blue Force tracking. And it demanded a greater and more sophisticated command and control to process all this information. And one of the systems that you see come directly out of our precision P&T, as embodied by GPS, was, all right, I might have to go to my notes, FBCB2. Anybody hear that? First employed in 1995. It is Force 21, Command Battle, Brigade and below. Did I get that right? Yay. That system has evolved continuously and is still employed today. And what I would point out from that system is it, like the precision-guided munitions, have changed our tactics, they've changed our strategy, and they have driven us to very advanced C4ISR systems. And I'm pretty sure that acronym's gotten longer. But the pertinent point about that is our C4ISR systems are one of our greatest force multipliers. And other folks know that. Now, let's see, we're here. This is an Air Force venue. The Air Force had a lot of GPS requirements for missiles and aircraft and satellites, but I'm a Navy guy. I'm just going to lump all that Air Force stuff in with the Navy requirements.
Around the world, around the clock, in defense of all we hold dear back home, America's Navy.
All right, I got sign-up sheets right here. You guys are ready? If you'll notice, there's a map at the end, so that's my tie-in. But everything you saw in that video requires P&T. The knowledge, precise knowledge of where you are and timing cannot be underestimated. It underpins every mission the DoD executes, and it has greatly permeated our civilian and commercial world. Now, the Navy secures the global maritime commons for the country. It provides unfettered access to the maritime global commons, which is the backbone of international trade and the global economy. By volume, 80% of global trade and 70% by value travels on the seas. 50% of the oil travels on set maritime routes through 8 well-identified choke points. And if you add all the oil in, it's about 70%. Now, the ocean is a big place. 70% of the Earth is covered by the ocean. It's a big place without a lot of landmarks. And the Navy teaches its people celestial navigation, and I have shot a sun line. Well, actually, more accurately, I have pointed a sextant in the general direction of the sun and decided to become an aerospace engineer. So that's hard stuff. So everything we have relies on GPS. Our planes, our ships, our UAVs, our SEALs, but not our submariners. For a long, long time, submariners have made their own way using INS, inertial navigation. They use it for their navigation, and they use it for their missiles. Now, if you guys recall, I said I knew some P&T guys, and you heard I work with the Draper guys. Draper guys invented that. And I have a couple of charts that I'll talk about. I was hoping they'd be here so you could talk to them, because it's a good opportunity to network. But again, I just don't think the importance of GBS can be overemphasized. Now, I don't know, I probably didn't mention at the beginning, but I did. The civilian world relies on GPS also. I mean, there is over 1 billion civil and commercial users worldwide of the GPS system. And I went to a meeting one time in the Pentagon that my boss at the time, Air Force General Bruce Carlson, wonderful guy, director of the NRO, didn't want to go to. And that was a good call on his part. He was a smart guy. So I went. And the general tenor of this meeting, or the purposes of this meeting, was we don't want to have all these satellites anymore. They're expensive, they're provocative, and so we're going to get rid of them. So I gave my most persuasive argument. I had facts and figures. DHS came in. They gave their most persuasive argument. They talked about infrastructure, they talked about security. All of that fell on deaf ears. No one cared. And then the Department of Commerce rep came in, and he started talking about the commercial dependencies on GPS. All those ships that I talked about, all that maritime trade, every one of those uses GPS. All those containers on all those ships, every one of those has a GPS RFI chip, or whatever you call it, on them. Every one of them. He talked about the automotive industry. He talked about agriculture. Every combine out there for Monsanto that drives for 10 miles, they do it with GPS. And he ended that meeting, and we kept all of our satellites. My only regret is he didn't get there sooner. But so it's important stuff. A lot of people know it's important. You see other countries trying to develop GPS-like systems, right? So the Russians have GLONASS, the Chinese have BeiDOS. See, the Japanese have, I'm going to have to look, QZSS. India has IRNSS. But none of those, not one of those systems can hold a candle to GPS. And not one country has made such exquisite use of PNT as the United States. We have revolutionized warfare with how we use GPS. We have changed how we buy weapon systems because we have GPS. Back in the wars of yore, it took a lot of planes to take out a target. A strike package was a lot of airplanes. Today, a strike package, and I'll get this wrong, is 3 planes. And we expect to take out 3 targets with that. And that's because we are the masters of PNT. So what's the threat? Well, the threat really is that fact. If you think about it, the way we wage war rests on PNT. And that, at the end of the day, is the threat. But we'll take a minute and we'll talk a little bit more about some threats we know about. Now, in this venue, obviously, my comments can be limited. I'll fall back on the old radioman's term of MIGI. Are you guys MIGI? Meakening, intrusion, jamming, interference. That's a pretty good framework to talk about the threats, with one exception. It needs a K now, and a K is the kinetic kill. So I did note with some pride that I have come up with a new acronym, which is MAGIC. Meakening is the rebroadcast of signals, right? Intrusion is today's cyber. It's attack from within. And I would offer that guys like you should think long and hard about that one. Cyber warfare is a big deal, and we see a lot of people investing in it. Jamming is jamming. Interference is accidental jamming. So if you kind of take a step back and you look at that, meakening and jamming are fairly local, right? They're a localized area of an active theater. And their success varies. I mean, I'm not a believer that GPS is really super vulnerable and it's going to fall out of the sky. How our weapon systems, how they respond to jamming, what we do, again, varied success. When I was PEO Space, I was responsible for the UHF satellites, which everyone uses. And that was the only SATCOMs coming out of the Middle Eastern theater, so people didn't like it if there's something happened to those comms. And I spent a lot of time studying jamming. And what I came away with is, it's not the most effective countermeasure, but it's cheap. So jammers are cheap. So our adversaries are always going to buy a lot of jammers and they're going to use them. So it's something we're just going to have to deal with. I mentioned intrusion or cyber attack. We see a lot of folks investing in that, particularly Russia and China. And that is the classic asymmetrical attack, and it is a fantastic force multiplier for them. So that's a very serious problem. Intrusion, there's databases all over the place that talk about annoying signals that people, that cause problems with GPS or other systems. But the Chinese, I'll just say, have used interference quite nicely to get rid of some ComSats that annoyed them. And they were like, oh, we don't know where that emitter's coming from. But so that's MeG, right? Well, then there's kinetic kill. And in many respects, that's taken the fight to orbit, on orbit. And that is tough to do. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's gotten splashy headlines. I would offer that perhaps some people have overreacted to that. GPS, there's a lot of satellites up there. There's like 31. They're in a tough orbit. But our adversaries have demonstrated that they're willing to pursue that avenue of attack. And we have demonstrated that we can do it too. But it wasn't easy. So you have to keep that in mind, but that's a tough one. And finally, I would just offer, in kind of a GPS-denied sense, you should consider environments that just naturally deny GPS, right? So if you're in an urban area, any situation where you get multipath or you have a limited field of view, those are areas. But I did forget to show you one thing. If you could go to the next chart, we have all used GPS, right? Including me. I don't know if that pup's using GPS or not. But a couple of weeks ago, I went to the National Western Complex, emphasis on complex, to watch pups run agility trials, pups jump in big water pools, having a great time, and I took some pictures of it. And at the end of the day, I was tired, I smelled like wet dog, and I just wanted to go home. Now, I told you it was the National Western Complex, right? I had no idea where my car was. I didn't even know what building it was outside of. But I had cleverly put a waypoint in my phone before I left by my car. And I walked out the wrong door, saw that there was a building, because that was even on the map, between me and my car, and I went back the right way. If you go another one, this for me embodies a lot of your challenge and advantage. I'm a climber, hiker. You can say that without actually being good at it. And so I put all this in my trusty little device. We turned it into a nice climb. We got caught in really bad weather. So I spent an hour walking with this thing out. I didn't go for my map and compass, which I carry. I carried this. And look how tiny this is, right? So that's GPS. As I said, I'm a big fan of GPS. It is a fabulous system. And I wouldn't write GPS off right away. And then again, I'll ask the Air Force guys to help me here. But GPS is a pretty tough system. One of its great advantages, as you know, is it's a broadcast system. And so for an example of how easy that is, in 2000, President Clinton signed an executive order turning off selective availability, which you guys all know added an error to the civil channels. And then in 2007, the DoD made that permanent. And after that, because GPS is a broadcast system, and if you know the waveform, you know the interface, there was an explosion of users that I talked about. So that kind of works to your advantage and to your disadvantage if you want to use GPS, because that's well established. That kind of interface is embedded in our entire system. It's embedded in all those C4I systems and those targeting systems, all that stuff I talked about that pushed and is a force multiplier for us. So if you want to go change that wholesale, that's a great idea if you get funding for it, because you guys will never have to look for another contract, but it's not a great idea for the country. That's a pretty tough one. I would offer, I think you guys have a mission to also augment GPS, right? Well, the GPS program's doing a lot of improvements. I'm not going to get them all right, but user equipment's a good place for you all to start, I would suggest, and it looks like that's where a lot of you are. They're improving their anti-jam receiving through anti-jam, they're improving selective availability, they're improving, I'm going to have to look. Or do you know that list? Are you going to talk about it?
A little bit.
He's going to talk about it, so I don't have to know that list. So all that kind of brings me back to GPS is a fantastic system. GPS underpins our way of warfare. It is critical to the global economy and critical to our economy. And it would be imprudent, foolhardy, to only have one source of something that is that important to everything you do. So in a long-winded, circular kind of way, I think I'm trying to tell you that GPS is important. What you're doing here is really important. And I hope it goes really well for you. I didn't time this. Is that good enough? All right. So I would take some questions, but I already cleared it with the Rincon guys. I got to pick on them. I'll take a question as long as it doesn't involve something as complicated as Raptor Zinc Ultrascale MP SOC SDR development kit, because I'm sorry, I have absolutely no idea what that is. Well, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing how this unfolds.
Any questions for that guy? Oh, one over here.
Yes, sir.
Do you think quantum computing will eventually play into this? I mean, the government's invested quite a bit of money into companies like D-Wave and how that progression comes into play. I just didn't know if that would potentially be a problem solver for you guys.
He did not pay attention to the, I didn't understand the, no. Quantum computing, right? So that's going to improve computing. It's going to make, if we can get it to work, it potentially makes devices smaller, certainly makes them faster. So yes, someone will find a way to apply it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, that's kind of a weak answer, but you know, I know there's a lot of investment in that. There's a lot of investment in those sorts of things. So yeah, I would say yes. I just think there might be a little ways to go, right? You got to beat that. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, everyone. More of a comment. In the 2007 timeframe, I was working for General Shelton at Vandenberg.
I like him. He's a great guy. A 4 Air Force guy.
We sent a team, a P&T team, out to the desert. General Hyten was actually Director of Space Forces out there. To investigate the problem, not of jamming of the satellites, but jamming the pluggers and daggers on the ground.
Oh, yes, that's, I'm sorry.
That was the big problem.
Yes, absolutely.
That was the big issue that we had to confront, not the satellites.
Absolutely.
On the ground.
Absolutely. And I guess I didn't make that clear. But you still have a geometry issue, right?
Yes.
Some of the weapons fly right through.
But what we found was most of the jamming, primarily all the jamming, was U.S. on U.S. It was unregistered weapon systems in the desert.
Interference.
Joint compound,
Yeah.
not registered, emitting signals that were blocking.
When I was looking at jamming, because the Navy went through a period where they became very concerned over jamming UHF, which is actually, you know, not that hard to jam just because of the wavelength. And I got real frustrated, and I read someone's abstract, because my position was, yeah, you go ahead and turn on your jammer. I got some friends who will take care of you and your jammer. And now that was not popular unless you're, right, if you're already in a conflict, yeah, but if you're not, that's not a popular answer. But you're absolutely right. Jamming is in the local theater issue for now. Right. People want to take all these things to space. We'll see how that goes. But very good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Ma'am, how do you see, so when GPS was, I guess, first introduced to the military force, there was a forcing function. It was kind of first of its kind. As you articulated, the dependency has developed since. As we look at alternatives to that, you know, our joint defense family hasn't always had the best record for getting on the same sheet of music to solve, you know, technological and other processes. What do you see as some of the key things we need to keep in mind to try to progress as a team effort to come up with a set of solutions that will retain some of our ability in the P&T area?
So I thank you for asking that. I actually had written something down, but I forgot to talk about it. One, I'm interested in this venue, right? You're here, I'm here, and it's a bunch of Air Force guys. Now, we both know we're here for the cookies, but we're still here. So that, I think, I'll be interested to see how this goes, and that's a very good point. The other thing I would caution you all is, as the Colonel pointed out, if we go to make improvements upon this system or to have backups to it, you cannot just look at one piece of the system. You have to step way back, and I hate to use a beat up old word, but you have to look at the entire enterprise. Right? You have to look at the whole thing. So P&T tells me precisely where I am. But if I don't know the relevance of that, it doesn't do me much good. And so this is a plug for all the other satellites. Right? We have, along with the improvements in P&T to get to precise positioning, navigation, and time, we have extraordinary maps. We have three-dimensional maps. We have maps with all sorts of information, and he's filming it, so we'll just say they're really good, right? And people use them. So you have to step back and you have to look at that whole system, and you have to understand how that matters to you. If you go straight to INS, if everybody's going to do inertial nav, you have to know where you started. INS just tells you where you went relative from where you started. And if you're not really sure where that is, I don't want to be in the Chinese embassy, right? Bad things can happen. So you do have to step back, as you point out. You have to look at all of this stuff, and you have to figure out a way to make it work. Yes, ma'am.
Congress, we got a directive from Congress, but knowing that we need a backup to P&T isn't new.
Correct.
J-STRATCOM, J6, the whole analysis of alternatives, capability description document, included in that some pretty well thought out recommendations, which probably aren't going to be that different from what we hear about today. But if you roll back and you look at what happened after those documents were produced, that no program was stood up. I mean, all of the funding goes through PO space and goes into investments through the space-based GPS system, which is only, one piece of the puzzle here. So as part of this direction from Congress, is the Air Force and the other services also looking at their acquisition structure and where they're actually going to be able to start acquiring some of these solutions?
Wow. Did you get that, or do I have to repeat? I don't have to repeat that. Okay, that's a great question. What time is happy hour? I'll try and wrap up. Your point is well taken. We recognize these problems early on. We document these problems early on. And then we document them again. And then we document them again after that. And then after we document them, we do analysis of alternatives. And if we don't like those alternatives, we do another analysis of alternatives. And so this goes on until here you are in 2018 with some very serious threats facing you that you may have lost some of your lead on. So that's a great problem. Or I'm sorry, that's a real problem. And then the question is of how are we going to do acquisition? Are people looking at acquisition? I hope so. I was a Navy acquisition officer for a long, long time. And I think you made an allusion to the fact that you guys aren't going to get funded to do anything as an alternative to GPS because the GPS SPO is going to make darn sure that never happens. Is that a fair characterization? Right? I'm retired. I can say this stuff now. I can say that. Maybe I can say this stuff now. I've been on YouTube enough. So you know what I used to tell my people? One of the advantages, so my guys would go and they'd pull my pay up, and then they'd pull my counterparts in industry and they'd tease me. And I was like, go away. As a government guy, how many government guys are in here? So we're a little outnumbered. But you guys aren't Lockheed Martin. You guys aren't Northrop Grumman, are you? You aren't Boeing. You don't have a lot of shareholders. You probably have some. So you have a little more opportunity than some of those big companies who do get whipped around by their shareholders. I used to tell my government guys, one of the advantages of being a government guy is I get to get up every day, go into work, and do my best to do what I think the right thing is. I don't have to worry about any other constraints. All I have to do is go and try and figure out what the right answer is and try and implement it. Now, one of the things we've done to our acquisition officers is we have tied their professional development and their promotion chances to their budget, right? Not to how did you solve that problem. And that's where you start running into some of these problems. People get their professional self-worth wrapped up in, was it $1 billion or was it $1.2 billion, right? And that's a tough place to be. I wanted to be a major program manager, and to be a major program manager, you have to manage a lot of money because that's how I was going to get promoted. And I liked my job, and I wanted to keep doing it. So I would offer, and we'll see if I get paid next month, that we need to take a look at that. We also need to take a look at how the budgets are managed. I used to laugh and say, you know, when I took the oath of office, I did not say I will support and defend the budget of the United States Navy against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and especially the Air Force. I didn't say that. But we get mixed up on that. And that's part of our acquisition problem. So how do you solve that? I don't know. I think venues like this are a good start. I don't think we leverage the really smart guys enough. And I'll be interested to see how this works out. It will be incumbent on the AFRL, or you the owners of this, to make sure it doesn't die. Right? If you come up with, there's some good ideas there, but there's a long way from a clock on a chip to a new device that we hand out to all of our Marines and soldiers and airmen and sailors. Right? So you have to manage that. So I don't know if I answered your question or just used my own bully pulpit, but that's the best I can do. One of the, I'm sorry, well, I skipped the chart. I had a couple of charts from Draper. I'm on the Draper Board of Directors. They're big in this stuff. They wanted to be here. We had a mix-up. I brought a couple of their charts to show for them, not just to do that, but because you guys have an opportunity to team. You guys can team, and it's a good thing for you. Oh, there you go. And it's not a threat, right? I was looking at the fact that this says we're going to try and do some teaming. Well, you know, I was trying to picture myself as a major program manager inviting Lockheed, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman in and asking them to get together and give me the best answer and to see how that would go. That's not how they're structured. I'm not sure that's really a rap on them, because those people show up every day to do good things for this country, but they're big businesses. They have to protect their intellectual property. They worry about that sort of thing. You guys have more of an opportunity. You just have to figure out how to transition it. What was the question, anyways? Yes, sir.
Just one more comment. On the Air Force side, for operations and training as opposed to acquisition, you may recall a few years ago at Red Flag, the Air Force instituted the sort of day without GPS. So they would start training their jet pilots to not rely on GPS and jam it out during their fighter exercises. And that's one way to attack the problem. I'm not sure it's the best way.
Well, it is, and you know, in all the wargaming, we satellite guys wanted to do a day without space. Remember the controversies of we're never going to allow a day without space because we're not going to look good at the end of that war game? Yeah, so it's like I said, I wasn't kidding when I said the Navy says we're going to teach, you know, we're all going back to Cecil navigation class. The Army and the Marine Corps, they're going to refresh their folks on how to do land nav with a compass and a map. Okay, that's hard. That's slow. That is not how we conduct warfare. So I don't know that that's the answer. I really think the answer needs to remain in a little device, is what I think, personally, right?
It was sort of at the height of the GPS jamming scare. And one way to address it was to go back to the roots and not have everybody solely rely on GPS.
So, like I said, we'll see if I continue to get paid. I am not a huge believer in this jamming threat. I'm certainly not a huge believer that our weapons are not going to function in a jamming environment. We'll lose some, but I think that that is a problem that can be solved. And I think guys like you can solve it. I think the jamming problem was a little harder for me with my big ComSats, but I also believe that could be solved. Give me a quantum computer that has a tremendous amount of computational capability, and I'll think my way out of that jamming signal, right? There's people out there that know how to do that. I'm just not one of them. So I'm not a big fan of, that's why I'm uncomfortable with this, what has occasionally appeared to me to be a wholesale assault on GPS. Holy cow, they're going to shoot them all down, and when they fall, they're going to hit our troops, and it's going to be awful. You know, I'm not a big fan of that. I think there's a risk. I think that we cannot function without precise P&T. And as I said earlier, it would be foolhardy not to have considered and have backups in our pocket. But GPS is, sorry, it's a pretty robust system. And I'm not even an Air Force guy, you know. I will tell you that when I was at the Naval Academy, we all have to take navigation. And it ends up being kind of a pass-fail class because the final exam is plot your course, plot where you are. And my fixed position came up on the next guy's desk, so I was a little nervous. Because that stuff's hard. And then I figured out I was on the wrong day and the tide charts and all that stuff, and so I got fixed. But wow, now do all this stuff while someone's shooting at you. That's going to be hard. I would much rather look at a little device.
Thanks for your vignettes and insights.
Thank you all for your time.